Mahalo and good morning to all of you and welcome. If I seem a little stiff, I can acknowledge that, and I really want to really reach out to you this morning and share a few stories and just spending some time reflecting. I'm really aware that the title of today is Grief and the Holidays. And I wanted to take seriously the whole notion of holidays. I know that this is a time normally when we're supposed to be in high gear and shopping and seeing friends and being excited about what's happening. But I want to take the notion of holidays in its more original meaning, that the holidays were really developed historically as holy days, where times of all cultures come together and celebrate different things, like birth and death and marriage. And today, what I wanted to do is I'm taking a little bit of a different perspective of speaking and sharing about grief, more in the context of the holy days, the sacred times. People in all generations have had an experience of what they call the holy. It is something that is very, very difficult to understand. It is very mysterious, and it is mysterious not in the way of sometimes people have a dark understanding of that, but mysterious in the sense of a depth of experience and knowledge and wisdom. And it is in that context that I would like to begin now with our traditional greeting of Aloha, everyone. Aloha. Alo literally means face to face. And the ha is the breath of God. And so the meaning of aloha is to be face to face, that you and I will be face to face for a while in the presence of the holy. And it is in that context that I wish to share some reflections, because I know that especially the people who have been with hospice, that this may not be a very joyous time. It can feel very isolating and alone, and especially a certain loneliness and missing. And I'd like to speak to that in the context of the holy. And I give thanks today for you, for our being here. And I really want to tell you that I'm also feeling some of your grief. My mother passed away in September, on September 1st. And so I'm still experiencing that loss. And I come into this holiday time totally mindful that this is the first holiday season that I won't have my mom with me. And I'm experiencing that loss and those feelings. And I hope that I can communicate some of the things that I've learned. A lot of times people tell me, and I understand, that grief is such a difficult thing. It really opens up to us different and new dimensions about ourselves and about the world. And oftentimes, grief is really seen as something to be very fearful about. I don't want to feel it. I don't want to talk about it. Just leave me alone. And I am going to ask us perhaps to take a bit of a different approach to grief. And I would like to, first of all, say that grief is really a reaction to loss. And loss has many forms. And I want us to understand that it is the body's response. I'm going to be talking a lot about our bodies, that the body responds to certain experiences of fear, of joy, of happiness, of grief. And there are natural things that automatically happen. And so it is with grief. The grief brings us oftentimes a lot of sadness, crying, a lot of loneliness, and experiences that some of us have never really had. And I want to talk about grief today, not only in terms of the loss of our loved ones, but there are many, many forms of grief, such as the loss of a relationship. We might be going through a time where, we've lost our partner to divorce. We have lost our children. They're in the mainland, and we really miss them. Grief comes in many, many forms. Grief can also be the loss of a future, the loss of a dream. Oftentimes for people at hospice, I hear people say, you know what, Grandma and I finally, our family is gone now. We're able to take our time. We work with each other, and it's been really wonderful. And then Grandma dies. And when Grandma dies, not only does she die, but our future dies. Our dream, we were going to go and live on the Big Island. And now I don't know what we're going to do. Loss can be in the form of losing your vision. Loss can be a mastectomy. All these forms of loss register as grief. That is the body's reaction to loss. And whether we're conscious of it or not, there are deep things that are going on in the body. And that's what I would like to address and speak about with you today. Loss in some of its forms. One of the things that I was taught before I worked with hospice, a friend of mine who has done a lot of work with death and dying told me this. He says, one of the things that I'd like you to remember is that you should always walk towards the suffering. Walk towards the suffering. When your natural reaction is to run away from it, when your natural reaction is to perhaps harden the body so you don't feel it, so you don't cry. I can remember the first time as a kid sitting in a theater and watching a movie that was really sad. And I became aware that I had so hardened my body because I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to look like a wimp to the people that I was with. And I really learned something at that point, that we don't often like to feel sad, and especially if there are deep losses. And so my experience has taught me at hospice, I have always remembered my dear friend, Frank, when he said, the way to deal with grief is to walk towards it, to embrace it, to not see it as something that is bad or wrong, but to come up close to it and experience it. And that even though it is hard at times, walking towards it and feeling the feelings that are happening and allowing ourselves to feel that is really the truest way to go through grief. So it is not a time to run away, but we're going to talk today about what it means to walk towards grief. And it is almost like, I would say, if you just sat down for a moment and just allowed yourself to feel your loss for your mother, for your father, maybe, and just be willing to be open and to allow yourself to experience those feelings and those memories. And even though it may be difficult at times, if we allowed ourselves to experience some of that, I have found that it is the only true way to go through grief. Now, we can avoid it for a time, and that's natural. Totally, totally natural. We can harden ourselves so that we don't feel. We can do all kinds of things not to cry. But when we are ready, when you feel that you can, then I invite you to be willing to sit with what you're experiencing, to open your heart, to open your body, to be open and to allow the loss. Because the truth is, loss is really your love and the relationship. Loss is your connection, really your connection. There was an old man that I worked with early in my years of hospice, and he and his wife, as I spoke about earlier, were so happy that they were now in their leisure. You know, their family had grown up and they had family all over the country. And he had a very, very serious and long illness. And they had totally decided that, you know, mom was going to take care of him. And they were just really ready for all of this. And suddenly she died. He was totally at a loss. He had not expected that. They had talked and joked about, well, I'm going to be the one who goes first. And now she had gone. And for weeks after the death, I would visit him and I would go to his house in Mililani. And whenever I would go, his house was all closed up. Blinds over the windows, door locked. And when I would go in, I would find him sitting in the dark living room, so angry and so hurt and not feeling that he could do anything. I visited him a lot. And over time, I saw him lightening up. And one day when I drove out there, I was totally surprised to see the windows open, the front door wasn't locked. And when I came in to see him, there was light in his eyes and he was sitting. And for the first time, I saw him just very, very light and happy. And I said, what's happened? Tell me what's been going on. And he said, this morning I got up each morning, same way. And as I walked past her picture, I started to talk to her. And I said, I'm so angry with you. Why did you leave me? We had planned all of the time to have this time just for us. And he talked and he unloaded and he told her how upset and lonely he was for her. And for the first time, after he went through that guilt, he could start to feel his love and feel her presence. And from then on, it changed. He allowed himself to go through that. Walk towards the suffering. There is a wonderful, wonderful friend that I have, although I never met him, and his name is Thomas Merton. He was a great spiritual. He was a Trappist monk, and he lived in the early part of the 19th century. He was born in actually 1915, I believe, and he died in 1968. And he was a wonderful, wonderful scholar. He lived the first part of his life living totally, as he said, the wrong way. And he lived fully, and he was a great writer, and he had many friends. And for some reason, in the midst of all of that, he decided that he was being called to something more. And he entered the monastery. And he entered one of the most rigorous monasteries, the Trappists. They spent many years in silence and prayer. And out of that experience, he became a very, very well-known spiritual guide, an author, and someone who is, although he was closed up in his monastery in Gethsemane, he was really a part of what was going on in the world, which is where I started to hear about him. He died in 1968. And so he lived through the Vietnam War. He lived through the civil rights movement. He lived through the deaths of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and all of the times that I shared in college. He was an amazing voice, very, very deep person. And one of the things he wrote, this is from one of his books where he is writing in poetry and verse. He says, there is in all visible things a hidden wholeness. And that hidden wholeness he calls wisdom, the mother of us all, Mother Earth. He, in his own life, had become so deep and connected that he felt himself connected to all of life, all of world. It wasn't just the relationship with people. He really understood. He would talk about his walks in Gethsemane and his coming to an understanding of the birds and the fields and the plants. And he was a deep, deep naturalist. There is in all visible things a great wisdom and wholeness. If you want to see this more closely, I would like to suggest that there are times that you have watched perhaps your grandparents, the kupuna, or seniors, who can sit a long time in silence. And oftentimes we're not even sure what they're doing, can remember my grandfather sitting at the beach, and I'd watch him because he would just sit at the beach, sitting in silence. I believe that they are touching into the hidden wholeness, this deep connection. And this is what Merton is talking about, that it takes quiet and silence and openness to experience the power, not only in the world, but in our bodies, in ourselves. And we have probably been so busy oftentimes, and we move so fast today, and we are so up into all of the latest things and social media and our phones, that oftentimes we don't know our own hearts. We don't know ourselves. And I would like to suggest that if we follow some of Merton's understanding of being willing to be quiet with our sadness, with our, yes, loneliness, with our not knowing where the heck we want to go and what to do, that if we could really sit with that for a while and allow it to open and reveal itself to us, that there is another way. And what I'm going to talk about today is what the body knows. You know, I have have worked with many nurses. Some of them were doulas, and some of them have spoken about the fact that they said, you know what, Clarence, there's really not a lot that we do at birthing or at dying. They said what we want to do with people is we want to allow the body, because the body understands birthing. The body understands what to do. And if we could just follow what the body is doing and not fight it and not resist it, there is a whole different experience of allowing the body to go where the body needs to go. And they said that's the same thing with dying. The body knows how to die. And if we can follow what the body is telling us, the body tells us when I don't need to eat anymore. I don't need food for energy. I don't need that. And oftentimes we think, well, we've got to feed them or else they're going to die. And that's the point. The body knows how to die. And if we can follow what the body is telling us, normally the person dies a very peaceful death. We know the signs, of dying. And especially people who have done this in many years, they can tell. The body knows how to birth. The body knows how to die. The body knows how to breathe by itself. Have you ever thought about that? That you don't have to breathe. The body breathes. And when you go to sleep, it continues to breathe. Marvelous, marvelous. And that if the body stopped breathing, we're in deep kimchi. The issue is how to allow our breathing, just to allow. Oftentimes when we're crying, I know that we're not aware of the body and the rhythms that happen. I'll tell you a story about myself. When I first began my work with hospice, I was asked to go and meet a family who had lost a child. And they asked me to, actually it was a baby, and they asked me to go and be with them. And, I said, of course, But as I came closer to that time, I got really afraid. And the fear that came up with me is, my goodness, what am I going to do? I know I don't know what I'm going to be able to tell them that will help. I don't know anything that I could tell anyone in this situation that would be helpful. And so that day, I listened to myself, and something in me said, go into the room first and sit with the baby so that you understand. And so I did. I asked the caretaker there to allow me into the room. And I went into the small room in the mortuary. It was just very small, and the child was laid out on a small table. And I sat there and just allowed myself to look at the child and to be with the child. Now, I didn't know this family. Friends had introduced us, and I didn't know this child. But as I sat there, I started to feel some deep things in my body, and I started to cry. And as I started to cry, I got really scared because I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know this child. I didn't know this family. And suddenly I was crying deeply, heavily, and I was so lucky that I simply said, I'm just going to allow this to happen. Just going to allow it. And this was something that I had never done before. And so I sat there and I wept and I wept. And and it scared me at times because I never cried that hard. But by allowing this, I just allowed myself for the tears to come, to weep and to sob. But as I did that for a while, I found, like a wave, that there were times when I felt a lot of the waves coming, and then the wave would go. And then I sat, and then the waves would come back. And after I did this a couple of times, I realized that there is a rhythm. There's a rhythm, and the rhythm is breath. That you begin to cry and sob, and that you allow that. And as you allow it, it kind of works itself out, and it's like a wave. It comes, and if we let it go, it goes. It comes and goes. And at that moment, I realized the gift that I had been given, that if this happened to me, the greatest gift that I could give to the parents was to allow them to do that. And so they came in shortly and they introduced themselves, and and I had dried my tears and tried to be very, very natural. And I said, I'm Chaplain Clarence, and what I want to do today is I'm just going to sit with you and your child, and I'm just going to be here with you. And so please sit with me. And they both went over to the table and they collapsed in crying, kneeling first, and then holding the child and sitting down. And as I allowed to happen what was going on in front of me, I didn't distract them. I didn't bring them Kleenex. I didn't try to do anything. I just allowed sobbing and crying to happen. And just as I had experienced, they went through these very high emotional times. And then there was that rhythm. And they quieted down. And as we did that for a while, nothing was spoken. We just did that. And pretty soon, the room became much more still and quiet. And then they started talking to the child. And they talked and they shared stories. And they would cry and they would tell more stories. And I, the chaplain, just sat in awe of these parents and the love that they had for this child and the beauty, just the utter beauty and power of two people mourning their loss. The body knows. The body knows how to grieve. And if we can just allow the body, we will do ourselves a great gift of going through the rhythms, the ocean rhythms, allowing ourselves to breathe with it. I've often heard people say that I don't want to cry because I'm afraid I won't be able to stop. And I tell them, my experience is not that. My experience is if you allow yourself to cry, you will naturally stop because you breathe in and you breathe out. And you breathe in and you breathe out. And the whole issue is allowing the wisdom, the wholeness, the power. And this is the way that the body is teaching us. I am so aware that part of the reason that we chose this topic to share is the whole power of the COVID, the pandemic, and the terrible, terrible losses that our community has felt, and the terrible, terrible, terrible times that people weren't able to be with their loved ones out of fear that they would spread the disease. And that caused even more grief. I was with a friend of mine early in the COVID, and his grandmother was dying, and large Hawaiian family, but they weren't allowed to be with grandma. And grandma was alone and had to die alone. And the family was apart, and they grieved alone. And then the funeral came, which they asked me to do, and only 10 people were allowed. So many of the families and the grandchildren couldn't be there. And that is really the grief of our community, the grief of not being able to be with at a very difficult time. And it's all understandable. I understand that. I understand that. But at the same time, the grief is building. Much grief, much sadness. Our kupuna. Walk towards the suffering. I went to college in the mainland, and I lived inland for a long time. And what I noticed was that sometimes I used to get very, very restless, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. And I just didn't feel good. And I went, I tried different things. I thought, well, maybe I need to exercise more, or maybe I have to watch my diet. But these moments would come when something was happening in my body and I didn't understand it. And one day I was driving somewhere, and all of a sudden I just said, I am going to drive to the ocean. And so I went across the country and I went to the ocean. And I can't tell you the power of when I first drove down towards the ocean. I saw the ocean, and it was almost as if my lungs turned into gills and I could feel myself breathe. And it was at that moment that I realized I'm an islander. I'm an island boy. I need the ocean. I need. And I know many of you have had the experiences of hiking, swimming, or doing things that you love in nature. And that we need that. We need the green. We need the sunsets. We need the beauty. We need that. And what all of that does is it tells us that we are all connected, that I need to be by the water. And I didn't know it in my head, but my body told me that. And so it was really important that day to drive down to the ocean. And many times after, when I started feeling that way, I would just go to the water and just sit there and allow myself to breathe and let the gills flap. We belong to Mother Nature, and Mother Nature belongs to us. You know, it is no accident. There is no accident. It's so much in our society is reflected in our care for the land. When we don't care for the land, that's why we can't care for each other oftentimes. That is why there is homelessness in Hawaii. That is why women feel so victimized, are treated so terribly, just as we treat nature and the world. And what that tells us is that we all are part of this. We are all a part of the world. And that I need the ocean. I need the water. I need to hike. It's important. The kupuna know this. And there is always the closeness of nature to the holy. I can remember when a dear friend of mine said, Olomana is my home. Olomana, I grew up in Kailua. I was very familiar. And she said to me, she said, you know, Olomana literally means power hanging down. Mana and Olo. Power hanging down. And she said, biblically, that was always the place where God came, that the 10 Commandments were given to Moses in the mountains, cloaked with the clouds, the mist, and that is where the holy often came from. The experience of the holy was to go up to the mountain and to experience the holiness, sacredness of that place. We are brothers and sisters. Mother Nature. I do a little work sometimes in a community farm in Waianae. It's called Ho'aina o Makaha. And there is a school next door. And the person at the farm teaches, and he teaches the kids there how to plant, what a good diet is, and how to care for the earth. He teaches them at night to say goodnight to the seeds. He teaches them what a healthy diet means. He's teaching them a part of their lives. We belong to each other. We are all one. And that there is great healing in trusting to that relationship. I think that I'm I have gotten carried away in different things. So I just wanted to say um, in this last part that I hope that what you will hear in me is the power of the land, the power of the ocean, and that there are ways to get through this time, that there are ways of being able and willing to experience what we are experiencing, and that it isn't bad or wrong. It's just that we haven't listened deeply. And so I just wanted to close with the understanding that a teacher, a Buddhist teacher, said that suffering is not caused by what happens to you. Suffering is not caused by what happens, but by how we respond to that, how we respond to loss. I would like to close with one of my favorite pictures, my photos that I'd like to share with you. I love this picture. Makes me feel good. And I close it with a saying of a great mystic who lived during the plagues, who lived during war, who was a woman of her time, who lived a deep, deep understanding of the divine. Her name is Julian of Norwich. She was an English, a great mystic. And this was one of her beautiful sayings that I'd like to close with. Despite all of the things that she experienced and the terrible terrors of war and disease, and sickness and death, this was what she gave us. All shall be well, and all shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. So while we live in these times when there are so many things that are happening, so many things that are very, very difficult, but I want you to know that there is also a wholeness and a wisdom that is also there, and a wisdom that can be captured by allowing ourselves to listen, to be aware, to touch nature and the world around us, to touch each other, and to experience the power of this moment that leads us to greater wisdom, greater healing, and greater life. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarence. That was a very nice presentation. So right now we'll go ahead and take some time for questions. There is the Q&A box below. If you have any questions, feel free to type it in there. If not, you can always send me an email at education@navianhawaii.org, and I can also forward your questions to Clarence. I did get one question in, Clarence. The reality of pain and suffering in our society, even in Hawaii, or moreover, the way that I was raised was not to show emotion, especially to cry and shed tears as a form of weakness. And I can find no real way to change that in me, which in turn has prolonged, I believe, my season through my own grief. What are your thoughts?
How beautiful that you can share that. I'm just moved by that. And I totally understand that. And I think a lot of people feel that way. It is hard to live in our society. It really is hard. The difficulty of just being able to feel belonging, to feel that we are part. I guess what I'd like to say to you is that, I really acknowledge you for just being able to speak that and to experience that. And that's what I'd like to say is that, if you'd ever like to have some time to just be quiet with all of that and allow yourself to feel what that feels like for you. Um, and it is hard at first. I understand that because I was I had the same thing. I told you in the beginning of so often hardening yourself so that you wouldn't cry or you wouldn't feel something, and how powerful it was when I just started to do a little at a time, you know, just a little, one tear. But I think that as you as you get older now, that there will be more opportunities, and I just thank you for being willing to go through that right now and to experience that. And now to say, what it sounds like to me is you're asking the question, and I believe that is how it begins, is you're asking the question and then experiencing some things, um, and allowing yourself to do that. There is nothing wrong with this. So often it is because of all of the judgments or all of the information that we have been taught at times, consciously and unconsciously. But perhaps if you would like, to maybe talk to a friend or talk to someone that who you admire, or if grandpa is still here, um, someone who is older and who has been through a lot. I think that's what really comes up, and I just bless you for being willing to share that and courageous. And I ask God's blessing upon you.
Thanks, Clarence. So we have another question that came in from an old colleague of ours, actually. How would you respond to a grieving adult who feels pressured to host the holidays as usual for the benefit of the family when he or she doesn't feel like celebrating at all and would rather not host?
True local families. Oh man. Ah. You know, let me just tell you my story a little bit, and maybe you can listen for something that might be helpful to you, because all families so different, yeah. And I don't want to be arrogant to think that I can tell you what to do, but here's what I have felt. I felt, what, this year, like I said, my mom died, and I really wanted to spend more time quietly. And I wanted to, one of my favorite things during Christmas was always to sit in the dark room with the lights on, listening to Christmas carols, and thinking just whatever came to my mind. And I loved that. And I want to do more of that, and I told my wife that. I said, I'd like to have more quiet time. I don't want to go to the party thing. And, a certain amount, yeah, I have to, I know I have family, they want to get together, but I'm going to tell people that, that I really have a need to experience saying goodbye to my mom and, giving thanks for her life. And that is really what I want this Christmas to be about. And I think that, I just think that if we could share more, obviously, I don't want to, not go to anything, and yet a lot of times I don't feel like going. And so maybe I will go for a while and say, I just want to be quiet later. And so excuse myself. But I do think, I'd ask you to consider respecting yourself too, that that there are times that we need to be alone, and you know I don't mean this to hurt the family or to trouble people. I'm really okay. I'm taking care of myself. and I want to be quiet. And maybe I'll come for a little while, or maybe I'll come in a little bit at the end, but um, or I need, like you said, I need to have someone else help me with the dinner, or help to do some of the work, because it's overwhelming to me to feel that I need to do this whole thing. And this year I want it to be different. So if you would be willing to share some of it with me. So these are the kinds of things that come to me, that I also want us to respect ourselves and to care for ourselves, because this is a very important time and moment, and that's, to many of the families that I've worked with during this time, you know, a lot of healing in terms of talking about our loss and talking about grandma, and not, a lot of times we don't want to talk about sad stuff. Well, I understand that, but at the same time, if we're not feeling happy, the sadness is there. So why not tell a few, stories? And again, I don't have a total answer for you, but I just ask that you give some time for yourself and care for yourself, and however you can manage that, according to your family and their style. But I'd really encourage you to do that.